Lieutenant Commander Ilara Voss stepped off the military transport plane in Atlanta with the kind of tired that sleep alone couldn't fix. It wasn't just exhaustion from the long flight back from Djibouti. It was the deep, bone-level weariness that came from months of staying alert in unpredictable places, making split-second decisions and carrying the weight of responsibility for others. At 34, she'd learned how to move quietly through chaos, how to read a room in half a glance, and how to keep her emotions steady, even when everything around her felt like it was falling apart. But now all she wanted was to get home to Seattle, hug her little sister, and hold her 6-year-old nephew without worrying about curfews, patrols, or sand in her boots. She wore her Navy service uniform, not because she needed to, but because it felt right. After half a year overseas, the crisp lines and familiar insignia were like armor and comfort all at once. Her medals weren't flashy, but they told a story. Deployments, commendations, nights spent watching the stars over foreign deserts while listening for trouble. She'd earned every stitch. The commercial terminal felt strange after so long in military zones. Bright lights, loud announcements, the smell of coffee and fast food instead of diesel and dust. She kept her duffel bag slung over one shoulder, her posture relaxed but alert, eyes scanning not out of suspicion but habit. She checked in for her Horizon Skies flight without issue, declined the offer for an upgrade, economy's fine, thank you, and found her seat near the back of the plane, window side, just as she'd requested weeks ago from a satellite phone in a dusty outpost. Boarding was slow. Families shuffled down the aisle with overstuffed carry-ons. Business travelers tapped impatiently on phones. A couple argued in hushed tones over whose turn it was to sit by the window. Ilara watched it all with quiet amusement. Civilian life always felt a little chaotic after deployment, like stepping into a room where everyone's dancing to a song you haven't heard yet. She settled into her seat, stowing her bag carefully beneath the seat in front. The fabric was worn but clean, the overhead bin slightly sticky, nothing unusual. She adjusted her seatbelt, wincing just slightly as the strap pressed against an old injury in her left shoulder. A piece of shrapnel from a roadside blast 3 years ago had left her with limited range of motion and occasional nerve pain. She'd learned to manage it, heat pads, stretches, and small adjustments like tilting the belt just so. It wasn't a big deal, just part of her now, like the scar on her forearm or the way she always checked exits when entering a new room. The cabin crew began their pre-flight routine. One attendant moved down the aisle with brisk efficiency, checking seatbelts, offering quick smiles that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her name tag read Tamsin. She looked to be in her late 20s with perfectly coiffed hair and a practiced air of control. Ilara noticed how she barely glanced at passengers, more focused on ticking boxes than making connections. That was fine. Ilara didn't need chit-chat. She just wanted a smooth flight. But then came the first ripple. As the plane taxied toward the runway, the captain's voice came over the intercom, reminding everyone to keep seatbelts fastened. Ilara shifted slightly, loosening the belt just enough to ease the pressure on her shoulder without unbuckling it. It was a tiny movement, barely noticeable, but Tamsin caught it. "Ma'am," she said, stopping beside Ilara's seat, voice clipped. "You need to remain seated with your belt properly fastened." Ilara looked up, calm. "I am seated. I just adjusted the strap. It's pressing on an old injury." Tamsin's expression didn't soften. "Everyone has a story," she said, just loud enough for the passengers nearby to hear. "But the rule is the rule." There it was, that subtle edge, the implication that Ilara was making excuses, that her pain wasn't valid. Ilara had heard that tone before in different uniforms in different countries. It never got easier, but she didn't rise to it. She simply nodded, pulled the belt snug again, and said, "Understood." Tamsin moved on, but the moment hung in the air like a missed note in a song. The woman in the aisle seat shot Ilara a sympathetic glance. Ilara offered a small smile in return and turned to look out the window as the plane lifted off the ground. Atlanta shrank below, roads like veins, buildings like toys. She let out a slow breath. 6 hours to Seattle. 6 hours of peace, maybe even a nap. She closed her eyes, listening to the hum of the engines, the gentle murmur of conversation around her. For the first time in months, she felt like she could finally exhale. But peace, she knew, was never guaranteed. Beside her, a young man, maybe 19 or 20, fidgeted nervously in his seat. He kept glancing out the window, gripping the armrests like he was bracing for impact. His name was Jonah, she'd learn later, a college student flying home after a semester abroad. This was only his second time on a plane, and the first had been turbulent. He hadn't slept well since. When the first jolt of turbulence hit 20 minutes into the flight, Jonah flinched hard. His water bottle, perched on the tray table, tipped over. Clear water spilled across the plastic surface, dripping onto the floor near the aisle. "Sorry," he whispered, scrambling for napkins. "I'm so sorry." Tamsin appeared almost instantly, drawn by the commotion like a hawk to movement. Her eyes flicked from the puddle to Jonah, then to Alara, as if they were in it together. "Can you people not even hold a bottle?" she snapped, voice sharp enough to cut through the cabin noise. Alara opened her eyes. "He's just a kid," she said evenly. "It's turbulence. It happens to everyone." Tamsin turned to her, jaw tight. "Don't make excuses for him and lose the attitude." Alara didn't move, didn't raise her voice. But something in her shifted, the way a storm gathers quietly before the wind kicks up. "I'm not making excuses," she said, voice low but clear. "I'm stating facts. And I haven't shown you attitude. But I will if you keep speaking to passengers like they're inconveniences." The words hung there. A few rows away, a woman stopped scrolling on her phone. A man in a baseball cap glanced over. Even the flight attendant at the front of the cabin paused mid-step. Tamsin's face flushed. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone in uniform who spoke with the calm certainty of someone who'd faced real danger and lived to tell about it. For a second, Alara thought the moment would pass, that Tamsin would walk away, save face, and they'd all move on. But then Tamsin leaned in too close and shoved Alara's shoulder. Hard. It wasn't a punch. It wasn't dramatic, but it was unmistakable. A deliberate, forceful push meant to assert dominance, to shut her up. Alara's head snapped back against the headrest. Pain flared in her shoulder, the old injury screaming in protest. A gasp rippled through the nearby seats. Jonah froze, eyes wide. The woman across the aisle covered her mouth. Alara didn't yell, didn't stand up. She just looked Tamsin dead in the eye and said, voice steady as stone, "You just assaulted a U.S. naval officer in uniform. Do you understand what you've done?" Tamsin scoffed, trying to laugh it off. "Don't flatter yourself." But her hands were trembling slightly. And the passengers around them? They were already reaching for their phones. Alara leaned back, heart pounding, not from fear, but from the weight of what had just happened. She'd been disrespected before, ignored, underestimated, talked down to, but never struck. Not while wearing this uniform. Not while representing the thousands who served quietly, far from headlines. She took a slow breath, closed her eyes again, not to shut the world out, but to center herself. Because she knew with cold clarity that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot, and she also knew exactly who to call, but for now she stayed still. Let the plane carry her through the clouds. Let the hum of the engines fill the silence. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay calm while the world around you starts to unravel. Outside, the sky stretched endless and blue. Inside, something had broken, and something else was about to begin. The cabin fell quiet after the shove, not silent, but hushed, like the air itself was holding its breath. People didn't look away. They didn't pretend it hadn't happened. Instead, they watched, some with wide eyes, others with tight jaws, all of them sensing that something serious had just crossed a line. A man 2 rows ahead lowered his newspaper slowly. A mother pulled her child closer. Even the baby who'd been fussing in the back stopped crying for a moment, as if even the youngest among them could feel the shift. Alara didn't move right away. She let the sting in her shoulder settle, let her breathing even out. She'd been trained for moments like this, not for drama, but for control. In the field, panic got people killed. Overreaction got missions blown. So she stayed still, eyes open now, fixed on the middle distance, giving herself space to think. Beside her, Jonah was pale. "I'm so sorry," he whispered again, voice cracking. "This is my fault." "It's not," Alara said gently, turning to him. "You spilled water. That's not a crime. What she did, that's on her." He swallowed hard, fingers twisting the edge of his sweatshirt. "People don't usually stand up for me." "Well, they should," she said simply. Tamsin had already walked away, but her stride was stiff, her shoulders tight. She tried to resume her duties, offering drinks, checking seatbelts, but her movements were jerky, forced. Every few seconds she glanced back toward Alara's seat, as if expecting an outburst, a confrontation, maybe even a physical response. But Alara gave her nothing. No glare, no muttered comment, no performance for the other passengers. Just quiet presence. That unnerved Tamsin more than anger would have. Meanwhile, whispers spread through the cabin like ripples in a pond. "Did you see that? She pushed her. She's in the Navy, look at her uniform." A teenager in the row behind discreetly filmed a short clip, not of the shove itself, but of the aftermath. Alara sitting calmly, Tamsin pacing near the galley, passengers exchanging uneasy looks. He didn't post it right away. He just saved it, sensing it might matter later. Alara knew she had options. She could demand to speak to the captain. She could file a complaint with the airline right then and there. But she also knew how these things often played out, especially when the person in uniform was a black woman. Too often her calm was read as coldness, her firmness as aggression, her truth as exaggeration. She'd seen it happen to others. She wouldn't let it happen to her. Not if she could help it, so she waited. The flight leveled out. The turbulence passed. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long golden streaks across the clouds outside. Most passengers relaxed again, returning to books, movies, or naps. But the tension never fully left. It lingered like a low hum beneath the surface. Alara reached into her carry-on and pulled out a small worn notebook, the kind she'd used for years to jot down thoughts, quotes, or reminders. She flipped to a fresh page and wrote 2 words, "Incident Report." Then she noted the time, the flight number, Tamsin's name from her badge, and a few key details. 1542. Moderate turbulence. Passenger spilled water. Attendant responded with verbal hostility. Physical contact initiated by attendant. Left shoulder, forceful shove. Multiple witnesses. She didn't write with anger. She wrote with precision. Because in situations like this, facts were armor. Jonah watched her quietly. "Are you going to do something?" "I already am," she said, not looking up. "Documenting it is the first step." He nodded slowly, as if absorbing a lesson he hadn't known he needed. A few minutes later, the lead flight attendant, a man named Gregor with kind eyes and a calm demeanor, approached their row. He'd heard the murmurs. He'd seen Tamsin's agitation, and he'd noticed the way passengers kept glancing toward seat 23A. "Everything all right back here?" he asked, voice low and neutral. Alara looked up. "No," she said. "It's not." She told him what happened, briefly, clearly, without embellishment. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She just stated what occurred, like reading from a logbook. Gregor's expression darkened. He'd worked in aviation for over a decade. He knew the rules. More importantly, he knew people, and he could tell Alara wasn't making this up. "I'll speak with Tamsin," he said. "And I'll inform the captain." "Thank you," Alara said. "But I'd also like to make a call once we're above 10,000 feet and devices are allowed." Gregor hesitated. Personal calls aren't usually permitted during flight, even on satellite phones. "This isn't personal," she said. "It's official." He studied her for a long moment, her posture, her eyes, the quiet certainty in her voice. Then he nodded. "All right. Once the captain gives the all clear, let me know. I'll make sure you have privacy." She thanked him and he moved away, already pulling Tamsin aside near the rear galley. Their conversation was too quiet to hear, but Alara saw Tamsin throw her hands up, shake her head, then cross her arms defensively. Gregor didn't back down. He stood firm, speaking with the steady authority of someone used to managing crises without fanfare. Time passed. The plane cruised smoothly now, cutting through high-altitude winds. Dinner was served, chicken or pasta, wrapped in foil with a side of stale bread. Alara ate slowly, not because she was hungry, but because routine helped ground her. Jonah picked at his food, still shaken. "You served overseas?" he asked after a while. "Yeah," she said. "Mostly East Africa. Logistics, coordination, some security work. That's intense. It's just a job," she said. "Like yours will be someday." He smiled faintly. "I'm studying environmental science. Not exactly frontlines material. Every role matters," she said. "Even the quiet ones." He thought about that for a moment. Then quietly, "Do you ever get scared?" She didn't answer right away. Outside, the sky turned from gold to deep orange. All the time, she admitted. But fear doesn't mean you stop doing what's right. He nodded as if that answer settled something inside him. Finally, the captain's voice came over the intercom. We've reached cruising altitude. You may now use approved electronic devices. Ilara waited a beat, then raised her hand slightly. Gregor appeared almost immediately. It's time, she said. He led her to the very back of the plane, near the lavatories where there was a small fold-down jump seat usually used by crew during takeoff and landing. You'll have a few minutes, he said. I'll keep an eye out. She pulled out her satellite phone, a compact, military-grade device that looked nothing like a regular smartphone. It connected to secure networks, bypassing commercial towers. She dialed a number she knew by heart. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Croft? Admiral, Ilara said. It's Voss, a pause. Then warmth cutting through formality. Ilara? I thought you were wheels down in Seattle by now. Not yet. And I've got a situation. She told him everything, starting from the boarding, through the shove, to the current state of the cabin. She kept it factual, but she didn't soften the truth. When she mentioned the physical contact, his voice changed. Did she leave a mark? Not visibly. But it aggravated an old injury. Witnesses? Multiple. Including another crew member, Gregor. He's been professional. Another pause. Then stay where you are. Don't escalate. Don't engage further. I'm calling the DOT liaison office right now. They'll notify the FAA and Horizon Skies corporate. If necessary, we'll have the plane met on arrival. I don't want a scene, she said. You won't have to make one, he replied. They will. He ended the call with a quiet welcome home. Ilara. And she felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief, exactly. But the knowledge that she wasn't alone. She powered down the phone and returned to her seat. Jonah looked up, hopeful. Everything okay? It will be, she said. Back in the galley, Tamsin paced like a caged animal. Gregor had reported the incident to the captain, who'd radioed Horizon Skies operations. Within minutes, a terse message came back. Treat as high-priority personnel issue. Document everything. Await further instruction, Tamsin argued. She provoked me. She was being disrespectful. Gregor didn't flinch. You put your hands on a passenger. In uniform. On a U.S. carrier. That's not provocation. That's a violation of federal aviation regulations. Tamsin went silent then, her face draining of color. For the first time, the reality hit her. This wasn't just a bad day at work. This could end her career. As the plane flew westward, the sun dipped below the horizon. Cabin lights dimmed. Passengers reclined their seats, pulled blankets over their laps, tried to sleep. But Ilara stayed awake, watching the stars appear one by one through the window. She thought about her sister waiting in Seattle, about her nephew who'd drawn her a welcome home card with a spaceship and a stick-figure sailor. She thought about the years of service, the early mornings, the missed birthdays, the time she'd bitten her tongue when someone questioned her competence just because of how she looked. And she thought about the fact that, even after all that, she still believed in doing the right thing, even when it was hard, even when it made her a target. The plane hummed steadily through the night sky. Below, cities blinked like scattered constellations. Ahead, consequences waited. But for now, in the quiet dark, Ilara Voss sat with her dignity intact, unshaken, unbowed, and ready for whatever came next. The night deepened outside the plane's windows. Stars scattered like salt across black velvet. Inside, most passengers had drifted off. Heads tilted against headrests, blankets pulled to chins, earbuds piping in soft music or sleep sounds. But Ilara stayed awake, not because she couldn't sleep, but because her mind was too full. Every bump of turbulence, every creak of the cabin, pulled her back to the moment Tamsin shoved her. Not the pain that had dulled to a familiar ache, but the disbelief, the sheer audacity of it, as if her uniform meant nothing, as if her service could be erased with a single push. She glanced at Jonah, now curled in his seat with his hoodie pulled over his eyes. He looked younger in sleep, less burdened. She hoped this flight wouldn't leave him afraid of flying. She hoped he'd remember not the fear, but the fact that someone stood up for him, even a stranger in a Navy uniform who owed him nothing. A soft chime sounded over the intercom. The captain's voice, calm but firm. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Seattle. Please ensure your seatbelts are securely fastened and tray tables are stowed. Ilara straightened in her seat, adjusting her belt carefully. No dramatic gestures this time, just quiet compliance. She didn't want any more misunderstandings. Not now. In the galley, Tamsin stood rigid near the coffee machine, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the floor. She hadn't approached Ilara's row since the incident. Gregor had taken over her duties in the back half of the plane, handling drink refills and blanket requests with quiet efficiency. The other passengers seemed to sense the shift. No one called for Tamsin. When she passed down the aisle, people looked away or pretended to be asleep. It was a small thing, avoiding eye contact, but it spoke volumes. In a space as confined as an airplane cabin, silence could be louder than shouting. As the plane banked gently toward the city lights below, Ilara's satellite phone vibrated once in her bag. A single pulse. She didn't pull it out. Devices had to stay off during landing, but she knew what it meant. Admiral Croft had moved fast. The wheels were turning. She thought about what came next. Would the airline apologize? Would they pretend it never happened? Would Tamsin double down, claim it was a misunderstanding? Ilara had seen it all before. How institutions protected their own. How truth got smoothed over for the sake of convenience. But this time felt different. This time there were witnesses, video, a paper trail, and a call made to someone who wouldn't let it slide. The plane touched down with a soft thud, rolling smoothly along the wet tarmac. Rain streaked the windows, blurring the terminal lights into golden smears. Passengers stirred, stretching, gathering belongings. Some chatted excitedly about homecomings. Others scrolled through messages, eager to reconnect. Ilara stayed still, waiting. Then came the unexpected announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain said, voice measured, "due to an operational matter requiring immediate review, we've been instructed to taxi to remote gate 7 upon arrival. All passengers will be asked to remain on board temporarily, while authorities conduct a brief assessment. We appreciate your patience," a murmur rose through the cabin. Remote gates were usually for maintenance, emergencies, or security issues, not routine arrivals. People exchanged glances. A few pulled out phones, already typing. Jonah sat up, eyes wide. "Is this because of what happened?" Ilara nodded once. "Looks like it," he swallowed. "Are you in trouble?" "No," she said, and meant it. "I did everything by the book." Outside, the plane turned off the main taxiway, heading toward a distant corner of the airport where fewer lights shone and fewer people waited. The rain fell harder now, drumming against the fuselage like a steady heartbeat. Minutes passed. Then through the rain-streaked window, Ilara saw them, a line of vehicles approaching. Not just one or two, but a small convoy. A black SUV with government plates, a white van marked FAA, 2 police cruisers with military insignia on the doors, and behind them a Horizon Skies operations truck. Her breath caught, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of it. They'd taken her seriously. All of them. Inside the cabin, passengers grew restless. A man in the front row stood up, peering out. "What's going on?" He asked no one in particular. Gregor moved down the aisle, speaking calmly. "Please remain seated. This is a standard procedure following a reported incident. It shouldn't take long." "Reported incident?" Someone echoed. Gregor didn't elaborate, but he didn't have to. The truth was already spreading, whispered between rows, typed into group chats, shared in hushed tones. By now, the video Jonah's neighbor had taken was likely circulating online, though Ilara didn't know that yet. Then the jet bridge connected with a soft thump. The door opened. First came 2 FAA inspectors in dark jackets, badges clipped to their belts. They spoke briefly with the captain, then scanned the cabin. Their eyes landed on Ilara. She gave a small nod. Next came a woman in a sharp navy suit, Horizon Skies corporate. She looked flustered, clutching a tablet like a shield. Behind her, 2 military police officers stepped aboard. Their uniforms crisp, expressions neutral, and then, stepping through the doorway with quiet authority, came Admiral Darnell Croft. He wasn't in full dress uniform, just a tailored overcoat and a look that said he didn't have time for nonsense. His eyes found Ilara immediately. He didn't smile, didn't wave, but the relief in his posture was unmistakable. Tamsin, standing near the front galley, went pale. She tried to slip behind a drink cart, but one of the FAA agents pointed directly at her. You're Tamsin Rourke. She nodded, voice barely a whisper. Yes. Please come with us. She hesitated, then followed them off the plane, head down, hands trembling at her sides. No cuffs, no shouting. Just the quiet removal of someone who'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. One by one, passengers were allowed to disembark, except Ilara. She stayed seated as the cabin emptied, Jonah lingering near the exit until Gregor gently urged him forward. She'll be right behind you, he promised. When the last passenger was gone, Admiral Croft walked down the aisle and stopped beside her seat. You okay? He asked, voice low. She nodded. Physically, yeah. Mentally, it's a lot. He sat in the empty seat across from her. They're treating this as a Category 2 crew misconduct case. Assault of a uniformed service member during flight. That's not just an airline issue, it's a federal matter. I didn't want it to blow up like this, she said. I know, he replied, but you didn't cause this, she did. And institutions only change when someone forces them to look in the mirror. A Horizon Skies executive approached then. Older man, silver hair, eyes full of practiced regret. Lieutenant Commander Voss, he began, on behalf of Horizon Skies, I want to offer my deepest apologies. What happened today was unacceptable. We are launching an immediate internal investigation, and Ms. Rourke has been placed on administrative leave effective immediately. Ilara looked at him. Will that be enough? He hesitated. We're also reviewing all crew training protocols, especially around de-escalation and handling passengers with medical or service-related accommodations. Good, she said, because this wasn't just about me. It was about every person who's ever been treated like they don't belong, just because they look different, serve differently, or need a little understanding. He nodded, genuinely this time. We hear you. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. Airport staff waited with umbrellas. News vans lined the perimeter of the remote gate. Word had gotten out. But Ilara didn't rush toward the cameras. She stood slowly, adjusted her uniform jacket, and walked down the aisle with Admiral Croft beside her. As she stepped onto the jet bridge, she saw Jonah waiting near the terminal entrance, holding a paper cup of hot chocolate. He'd bought it for her. I didn't know what you liked, he said, offering it with a shy smile. But it's cold out. She took it, warmth seeping into her hands. Thank you. He hesitated. Will you be okay? I will, she said. And so will you. Just remember, when you see something wrong, say something. Even if your voice shakes. He nodded like he was filing that away for life. Later, in a quiet airport lounge away from the media, Ilara gave her official statement to the FAA and military liaisons. She stuck to the facts, named witnesses, shared her notes, asked only one thing, that the focus stay on accountability, not spectacle. By midnight, the story was everywhere, not because she'd sought attention, but because people had seen what happened and refused to look away. Social media buzzed with clips, quotes, calls for change. Veteran groups issued statements. Aviation unions weighed in. Horizon Skies released a public apology before sunrise. But Ilara didn't watch any of it. She was finally in the back seat of her sister's car, wrapped in a fleece blanket, listening to her nephew's sleepy voice over speakerphone. Auntie Lara, did you bring me a rock from Africa? She smiled for the first time all day. I brought you 3. As the city lights blurred past the rain-smeared window, she closed her eyes, not to escape, but to rest. The fight wasn't over. There would be interviews, follow-ups, maybe even a hearing. But for now, she was home. And that was enough. The days after the flight moved in a strange rhythm, part ordinary, part surreal. Ilara woke up in her sister's guest room to the sound of rain tapping on the roof and the distant hum of Seattle traffic. Her nephew, Kofi, had left a drawing on her nightstand, a stick-figure woman in uniform standing tall beside a much smaller airplane. With a speech bubble that read, "She said no." She smiled, tucking it into her notebook beside her flight notes. But the calm didn't last long. By mid-morning, her phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from old shipmates, fellow officers, even people she hadn't spoken to in years. Some offered support. Others shared their own stories. Being questioned at airports, denied service, spoken to like they were threats just for wearing their uniforms in public. A retired Marine messaged, "They see the uniform but forget the human underneath." Ilara read each one carefully, saving the ones that felt true. the ones that echoed her own quiet frustrations. She avoided the news at first, didn't scroll social media, didn't watch the clips. But her sister, Nia, couldn't help but fill her in over breakfast. "It's everywhere," Nia said, stirring honey into her tea. Horizon Skies issued a second apology this morning. They're calling it a critical failure in crew judgment. And that flight attendant? Her name's all over the place, Ilara winced. I don't want her ruined. Nia looked at her over the rim of her mug. You don't? After what she did? I want accountability, Ilara said slowly. Not destruction. There's a difference, Nia nodded, thoughtful. Maybe, but people are angry. And honestly, they should be. Later that day, a package arrived. Plain brown box, no return address. Inside was a hardcover book, The Cost of Silence, by a former flight attendant who'd blown the whistle on systemic bias in the airline industry. Tucked in the front cover was a handwritten note. You gave us all permission to speak up. Thank you. No name. Just gratitude. That note stayed on Ilara's dresser for weeks. Meanwhile, Horizon Skies moved faster than anyone expected. Within 48 hours, they announced Tamsin's termination, not just suspension, but full dismissal, citing gross violation of passenger safety, protocols, and unprofessional conduct. They also revealed they were partnering with a veterans advocacy group to overhaul their crew training program, with a focus on trauma-informed responses, implicit bias, and recognizing service-related accommodations. But the real surprise came when the airline's CEO requested a private meeting with Ilara. She almost said no. She didn't want to be used as a PR prop, trotted out for photo ops while real change stalled behind closed doors. But Admiral Croft advised her to go. Meet them, he said. Not as a victim. As a standard bearer. Make them see you, not just your uniform, not just the incident, but the person who expects better. So she agreed. The meeting took place in a quiet conference room at Horizon Skies' regional office, far from cameras and press. The CEO, a woman named Lynn Tran with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, didn't lead with apologies. She led with questions. What would real accountability look like to you? She asked. Ilara didn't hesitate. Training that's mandatory, not optional. Scenarios that include veterans, people with invisible injuries, passengers who don't fit the ideal traveler mold. And a clear path for passengers to report issues without fear of retaliation. Lynn listened, took notes, didn't interrupt. Then she said, We're also creating a passenger advisory council. Would you consider joining? Ilara was quiet for a long moment. Only if it includes others like me, not just officers but enlisted personnel, disabled vets, people of color who've been profiled. This can't be about one story. It has to be about all of them? Lynn nodded. Fair. No promises were made that day. No handshakes for the cameras. Just a quiet understanding that change, if it came, would have to be built by the people who'd lived the problem. Back home, life tried to return to normal. Ilara helped Kofi with his science project, a model volcano that erupted with baking soda and vinegar. She walked through Discovery Park, breathing in the salt-tinged air, letting the wind off Puget Sound wash away the last of the flight's tension. She even went to a coffee shop alone for the first time in months just to sit and read, unobserved, but the world hadn't forgotten. A week after the flight, she received an invitation to testify before a congressional subcommittee on transportation and workforce equity. The hearing was titled Safety in the Skies, Addressing Bias and Accountability in U.S. Aviation. Her name was listed alongside airline executives, FAA officials, and civil rights advocates. She almost declined. Public speaking wasn't her strength. She preferred action over words, deeds over declarations. But then she thought of Jonah, still nervous about flying. Of the retired flight attendant who'd sent the book. Of every service member who'd been told to calm down when they were just asking to be treated with basic respect. So she said yes. Preparing for the hearing was grueling. Lawyers from the Department of Defense reviewed her statement line by line. Admiral Croft coached her on tone, pacing, how to stay grounded when tough questions came. They might try to paint you as angry, he warned, or as exaggerating. Don't let them define your truth. She practiced in front of Nia and Kofi. Kofi, ever the critic, gave her a thumbs up. You sound like a superhero, he said. I'm not, she replied. I'm just someone who said enough is enough. The day of the hearing, she wore her service dress blues, not for show, but because it was who she was. As she walked into the Capitol building, cameras flashed, reporters called her name, but she kept her eyes forward. Inside the hearing room, the air was thick with formality. Long tables, name placards, rows of observers. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't read from a script. She looked at the committee members and spoke like she was talking to neighbors over a fence. "I didn't board that plane looking for a fight," she began. "I just wanted to get home." But when someone puts their hands on you, especially while you're wearing the uniform of a country you've sworn to protect, it's not just about that moment. It's about every time you've been made to feel like your service doesn't count because of how you look, how you speak, or who you are. She spoke about the shoulder injury, about the way Tamsin dismissed her explanation, about the shove that wasn't just physical, it was a message. You don't belong here. "But here's what I want people to understand," she said, voice steady. "This isn't about one bad employee. It's about systems that don't prepare people to see humanity in those who are different. It's about training that focuses on rules, not respect. And it's about the fact that for too long, passengers, especially black passengers, especially service members, have been told to be grateful for a seat, even when they're treated like a problem." She didn't ask for punishment. She asked for prevention. After her testimony, several lawmakers approached her privately. One, a former Army medic, shook her hand and said, "My daughter's in the Air Force. Thank you for making the skies safer for her." Outside the building, a small crowd had gathered, veterans in uniform, flight attendants holding signs that read, "We stand with her," families with kids and strollers. No chants, no anger, just presence. That night back in Seattle, Ilara sat on the porch with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the city lights shimmer through the drizzle. Her phone buzzed again, this time a message from Jonah. "I flew again today. Just a short hop to Portland for a weekend trip. I was nervous, but I remembered what you said. And I made it. Thanks for showing me that courage isn't loud. It's quiet and it's real." She typed back, "Proud of you." Later, she opened her notebook to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote, "What comes next?" Beneath it, she listed 3 things. Help design the new crew training modules. Visit Kofi's school for Career Day. Talk about service. Not just the military, but service in all forms, and keep listening. Because change doesn't happen in one moment. It happens in 1,000 small ones. The rain softened to a mist. Somewhere in the distance, a fairy horn sounded. Ilara leaned back in her chair, wrapped in the quiet certainty that she'd done the right thing, not for fame, not for revenge, but because someone had to. And sometimes, that someone is you. 3 months passed like pages turning in a well-worn book, quietly, steadily, with moments of surprise tucked between the ordinary. Ilara had returned to her regular routine. Morning runs along the waterfront, coffee with Nia before work, helping Kofi with homework that grew more complicated by the week. She'd taken a temporary assignment at the Naval Support Activity Office in Bremerton. Less travel, more desk work, but it gave her space to breathe after years of constant motion. The world hadn't forgotten what happened on Horizon Sky's Flight 287, but the noise had settled into something quieter, more purposeful. The viral clips had faded from headlines, replaced by policy updates, training rollouts, and small but real shifts in how airlines talked about passenger dignity. Horizon Skies had launched their new crew training program, co-developed with veteran organizations and disability advocates. Ilara had reviewed the modules, offered feedback, and even recorded a short video used in the de-escalation section, not as a victim, but as an instructor. "Most conflicts start with misunderstanding," she said in the clip. "And most end with someone feeling seen." She never saw Tamsin again. The former flight attendant had vanished from public view, and Ilara respected that silence. She didn't wish her harm. She just hoped she'd learned something. That authority without empathy is just control, and control without respect breaks people. One rainy afternoon, Ilara received a letter in the mail. Not an email, not a message, actual paper, folded neatly inside a cream-colored envelope with no return address. She opened it carefully, half expecting another thank you note or a request for an interview. Instead, the handwriting was shaky but clear. The ink slightly smudged, as if written with care over many days. "Dear Lieutenant Commander Voss," it began, "I worked as a flight attendant for 32 years. I retired 5 years ago, but I still think about the skies every day. I saw your testimony. I read your words. And I have to tell you, I'm ashamed. Not because I did what Tamsin did, but because I stayed quiet when I saw others treated unfairly. I told myself it wasn't my place, that it wasn't my problem, but it was. It always was. The letter went on. The writer described passengers overlooked because of their accents, mocked for needing extra time, spoken to like children when they asked simple questions. We were trained to serve but not to see, she wrote. You reminded us that service means seeing the person, not just the seat number. She ended with, thank you for giving us all a chance to do better. Even those of us who are no longer in the air. Ilara read it twice. Then she tucked it into her notebook, right beside Kofi's drawing and Jonah's first message. These weren't trophies. They were reminders of how one moment could ripple outward in ways no one could predict. Around the same time, Jonah reached out again. This time it wasn't a text. It was an invitation. He'd started a campus initiative at his university called Bridge Crew, a volunteer program that paired students with returning service members to help them navigate the awkward, often lonely transition back to civilian life. Some veterans needed help with job applications. Others just wanted someone to talk to over coffee, someone who wouldn't ask about combat but would listen if they chose to share. Jonah had modeled the program after the kindness Ilara showed him on that flight. I called it Bridge Crew, he wrote, because you helped me cross a moment I thought I couldn't handle. Now I want to help others cross theirs. Ilara agreed to speak at their first orientation. She didn't give a speech. She just sat in a circle with students and vets, shared her story plainly, and answered their questions about fear, about coming home, about what it felt like to be both invisible and hypervisible at the same time. Afterward, a young woman who'd served in the Coast Guard hugged her and whispered, I thought I was the only one who felt like I didn't fit anywhere anymore. You're not, Ilara said. And you never were. Back in Seattle, life continued its gentle rhythm. But something had shifted, not just in the world, but in Ilara herself. She'd always seen her service as duty, not identity, but now she understood that standing up, even quietly, was also part of that duty. Not because she wanted to be a symbol, but because someone had to hold the line so others wouldn't have to. One Saturday morning, she took Kofi to the Museum of Flight. He'd been obsessed with airplanes since the incident, not out of fear, but fascination. How do they stay up? He'd ask eyes wide. What if the engines stop? She'd explain lift, thrust, redundancy, simple terms for complex things. At the museum, he ran from exhibit to exhibit, pressing his nose against glass cases, imagining himself in the cockpit. At one display, a replica of a 1940s passenger cabin, he stopped suddenly. Auntie Lara, he said, pointing to a mannequin in a vintage uniform, was it always hard for people like you to fly? She knelt beside him. It's been hard for a lot of people, Kofi. Not just in the sky, in trains, buses, restaurants, schools. But people kept showing up anyway. They kept saying, I belong here too. And little by little things changed. He thought about that. Then so you were brave like them?
I tried to be, she said.
But bravery isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right even when you're scared. He nodded as if that made perfect sense. Later that week, Ilara got a call from Admiral Croft. Not about policy or testimony, just a check-in. How are you really doing? He asked. She paused. Tired, but good. Like I'm finally catching up to myself. He chuckled softly. That's the goal, isn't it? To come home not just to a place, but to yourself. They talked for a while about nothing urgent, just life. Before hanging up, he said, You know, you didn't just change an airline. You reminded people that dignity isn't optional. It's the baseline. She didn't know how to respond to that, so she just said, Thanks, sir. No, he replied. Thank you. The story never ended with a courtroom verdict or a dramatic confrontation. There was no villain dragged into the light, no grand finale where everything was fixed. Real change doesn't work like that. It's slow. It's messy. It happens in training rooms, in letters, in college programs started by nervous kids who once spilled water on a plane. It happens when someone chooses to believe that people deserve better, and then acts like it. Ilara still flew occasionally, though she always chose horizon skies now, not out of loyalty, but because she'd seen the changes firsthand. The crew wore new badges with a small emblem, 2 hands, one offering, one receiving. Service with respect, it read underneath. She'd smiled the first time she saw it. On one of those flights, a new attendant, early 20s, name tag reading Mira, paused by her seat during drink service. "Lieutenant Commander Voss?" she asked quietly. Ilara nodded. "I just wanted to say, thank you. I went through the new training last month. It changed how I see my job. I used to think it was about rules. Now I know it's about people." Ilara looked at her, the earnest eyes, the slight tremor in her voice, and saw not Tamsin, but someone trying to do better. "You're welcome," she said. "And thank you for listening." The plane lifted into the sky, smooth and steady. Outside, clouds parted to reveal endless blue. Inside, a quiet understanding passed between 2 strangers, one who'd been hurt, and one who refused to repeat the mistake. And in that moment, high above the earth with the hum of engines and the promise of home ahead, Ilara Voss finally felt at peace, not because the world was perfect, but because it was moving in the right direction. One choice, one conversation, one act of courage at a time.